Have you ever swiped through 100 profiles in 10 minutes, then felt oddly empty afterward, like eating fast food that looked delicious but left nothing but regret? What if the speed itself is the problem? Not the apps, not the people, but the frantic pace that turns potential partners into a blur of faces that never quite become real. This is the question at the heart of the truth about slow dating. Is swiping quickly ruining love? Understanding this could explain why dating feels increasingly exhausting despite having more access to potential partners than any generation in history. Here's what makes this moment in dating culture so fascinating. There's a backlash happening right now against swipe-fast culture, and it's not coming from anti-technology romantics pining for the past. It's coming from the apps themselves, from relationship researchers, and most importantly, from users who've realized that treating dating like a video game is destroying their ability to actually connect. The movement is called slow dating, and it represents a fundamental shift in how people are choosing to use technology for romance. But before exploring what slow dating is and why it works, there's something important to understand about what swiping quickly actually does to the brain. Dating apps are built very deliberately to promote fast, superficial decisions. Think about the architecture of most swipe apps: minimal information, heavy visual focus, endless profiles that scroll infinitely, and gamified dopamine hits from every match. This isn't accidental design. These features keep people using the app longer, which benefits the platform regardless of whether it benefits the user's actual love life. And here's what research reveals about what happens when people evaluate high numbers of profiles quickly. Decision quality drops significantly. Users start relying more and more on what researchers call easy cues: age, height, physical appearance, and less on deeper information about values, communication style, or compatibility. This happens because processing lots of information quickly becomes mentally exhausting. The brain starts taking shortcuts, filtering people out based on increasingly trivial criteria just to manage the overwhelming volume of choices. Studies examining excessive swiping, not moderate use but high-volume compulsive swiping, find associations with some troubling outcomes. There's something called partner choice overload, which creates a fear of settling. The thinking becomes, why commit to this person when there might be someone even better just a few swipes away? There are also links to more self-doubt, lower life satisfaction, and higher psychological distress, similar to the effects researchers see with social media overuse. The comparison isn't coincidental. Both involve scrolling through idealized presentations of people and feeling inadequate by comparison. But here's where things get particularly interesting about how speed affects love specifically. Choice overload doesn't just create indecision, it actively undermines satisfaction. When options feel limitless, people become less satisfied with whatever choice they eventually make. They're more likely to keep swiping even after meeting someone they genuinely connect with. They're more prone to comparing real partners with all their human complexity and imperfection to imagined better matches that exist only as possibility. Researchers who study app architecture argue that the platforms nudge users into what's called heuristic-driven choices. This is a fancy term for mental shortcuts. When presented with many profiles in rapid succession, people rarely process them deeply. They can't. The brain doesn't have the capacity for that level of analysis at high speed. So users get stuck in what experts describe as a browse and discard mindset. Scroll, judge, reject, scroll, judge, reject. Over and over until everyone starts to blur together into interchangeable options rather than actual humans. And this creates a particularly vicious cycle. Qualitative research, interviews with actual users, journalism covering dating culture consistently describes the same pattern: a swipe, ghost, repeat cycle that feels addictive but emotionally empty. More burnout, more ghosting, lower accountability in how people treat each other. The speed makes it too easy to discard people, to avoid difficult conversations, to jump to the next option whenever anything becomes even slightly uncomfortable. Which brings up an obvious question. If swiping quickly creates all these problems, why not just delete the apps entirely? Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The solution isn't necessarily abandoning technology. It's changing how that technology gets used. This is where slow dating comes in, and why it's gaining serious traction among people who are tired of the exhausting churn of swipe culture. Slow dating means fewer, more intentional dates, with emphasis on shared values, clear boundaries, and emotional compatibility instead of chasing constant novelty. Major dating platforms, Bumble, Hinge, and various matchmaking services report that a noticeable percentage of singles are now consciously limiting how often they date. They're communicating needs and boundaries earlier in conversations. They're focusing on what some platforms call slowmance, low pressure, gradual relationship development rather than rushing into labels or physical intimacy. Platform data shows that roughly 1/3 of Bumble users in the United States say they're practicing slow dating. That's a significant shift from just a few years ago. These users report going on fewer dates specifically to protect their mental health and be more considerate with their energy. They're recognizing that dating doesn't have to be, and probably shouldn't be, a constant activity consuming every spare evening. So what does slow dating actually look like in practice? It means spending more time on each profile and pre-date conversation before deciding to meet. Actually reading what someone wrote instead of just glancing at photos. Asking meaningful questions through messaging to screen for basic compatibility before investing time in an in-person date. It means meeting fewer people but giving each connection a genuine chance. Instead of going on 5 first dates in a week, maybe it's 1 date every 2 weeks, with space between to actually process the experience and reflect on whether there's potential. And crucially, it means being upfront about boundaries, mental health needs, and long-term relationship goals earlier in the process. This might sound unromantic or overly strategic, but research suggests it's actually far more effective than the alternative. Here's what studies on relationship formation reveal. Moderate intentional app use doesn't show the same negative effects as compulsive high-volume swiping. The problems spike specifically when users treat dating like an endless social media feed rather than a path to a few quality connections. Slow dating aligns perfectly with evidence about what actually predicts good relationships. Connection quality depends far more on communication style, shared values, and emotional safety than on maximizing the number of candidates. Yet swipe culture emphasizes exactly the opposite. It pushes volume over depth, speed over consideration, surface attraction over compatibility. But there's a common misconception worth addressing directly. Slow dating doesn't mean being passive, playing hard to get, or creating artificial delays just to seem less eager. Those are game-playing strategies that usually backfire. Slow dating is about being deliberate and present. It's about resisting the artificial urgency that apps create, the feeling that opportunities will disappear if decisions aren't made immediately. It's recognizing that good relationships actually benefit from a gradual foundation rather than rushing through early stages just because technology makes everything feel fast. Think about what happens psychologically during rapid swiping versus slow dating. Rapid swiping keeps the brain in what's called a state of constant arousal, always scanning, always judging, always looking for the next thing. This is exhausting and prevents the deeper cognitive processing required for genuine connection. Slow dating allows the nervous system to settle. There's space to notice subtle things, how someone communicates when they're stressed, whether they ask questions or just talk about themselves, if they respect boundaries or push against them. These signals become visible only when there's enough time and attention to perceive them. Speed obscures these crucial compatibility markers. There's also something important happening with expectations when someone practices slow dating. The expectation shifts from finding the perfect person immediately to exploring whether genuine compatibility might develop over time. This reduces the pressure that often kills early connection. First dates become lower stakes, just two people getting to know each other rather than auditions where one wrong word ends everything. And paradoxically, this lower pressure often leads to better outcomes because both people can relax enough to show up authentically. Now, some people worry that slow dating puts them at a disadvantage. They think, if other people are meeting tons of potential partners and going on dates constantly, won't they find someone first while I'm being slow and intentional? But the research doesn't support this fear. High-volume dating doesn't actually lead to better relationship outcomes. It often leads to decision fatigue, lower satisfaction, and repeated shallow connections that go nowhere. Slow dating might mean meeting fewer people, but the people met are far more likely to be actual matches rather than just profiles that looked good in the moment. Quality over quantity isn't just a saying, it's a strategy backed by relationship science. So, what does all of this mean for someone trying to navigate modern dating without burning out or losing hope? Here's what the research and emerging cultural wisdom suggests. First, recognize that swiping itself isn't evil or inherently damaging. The technology is neutral. What matters is how it's used. The speed, the volume, and whether it's being used as avoidance or as a genuine tool for connection. Apps can facilitate meeting people who would never cross paths organically, which is genuinely valuable. But using them compulsively, treating dating like a numbers game or staying in constant browse mode, these behaviors actively undermine the possibility of love developing. Second, set intentional limits on app usage. This might mean limiting swiping to certain times of day rather than scrolling whenever there's a spare moment. It could mean putting a cap on how many profiles get viewed per session, maybe 10 instead of 100. Or it might mean taking regular breaks from apps entirely to prevent the burnout that comes from constant exposure. The goal is using apps as a tool when needed, rather than as a constant source of validation or distraction. Third, slow down the early stages deliberately, even when the impulse is to rush. Spend real time reading profiles and initial messages. Have actual conversations before agreeing to meet. And once meeting happens, resist the urge to immediately jump to the next date or make premature decisions about the relationship's trajectory. Let things unfold at a human pace rather than at the artificial speed that apps encourage. Fourth, be upfront about practicing slow dating. Communicate early that the approach is intentional rather than playing games. Something like, I'm being deliberate about dating to make sure I'm giving real connection space to develop, signals intention and maturity. People who are looking for genuine connection will appreciate this. People who just want quick, superficial interaction will likely filter themselves out, which is actually a benefit rather than a loss. Fifth, focus on fewer connections with more depth rather than many shallow interactions. If there are 5 ongoing conversations, that's probably too many to give each one adequate attention. Maybe it's better to have 1 or 2 conversations where there's genuine engagement and curiosity about the other person. This doesn't mean putting all emotional eggs in one basket prematurely. It just means recognizing that meaningful connection requires attention, and attention is a finite resource that gets diluted when spread too thin. Sixth, pay attention to how dating activity affects mental and emotional state. If app usage consistently leaves someone feeling worse, more anxious, more inadequate, more exhausted, that's important information. It suggests either the volume is too high, the approach needs adjustment, or perhaps a break is needed. Dating should add to life, not drain it. And finally, remember that slow dating is ultimately about respecting both personal well-being and the humanity of potential partners. Fast swiping tends to dehumanize. People become profiles. Profiles become options. Options get discarded with no real consideration. Slow dating rehumanizes the process by creating space to see people as complex beings rather than just photos and bio descriptions. This shift alone can transform the entire dating experience from exhausting to actually enjoyable. So, is swiping quickly ruining love? The answer is nuanced but clear. Swiping itself is just a tool. But when used at high speed, in high volume, with the mindset that apps encourage, constant scanning for something better, quick judgments based on minimal information, low investment before moving to the next option, yes, it damages the capacity for genuine connection. It trains the brain to treat people as disposable and to maintain a constant state of dissatisfaction because there's always another profile to swipe. But the same technology can be used differently. Slow dating represents using apps with intention, setting boundaries around usage, prioritizing depth over volume, and maintaining realistic expectations about how connection actually develops. This approach aligns with everything relationship science reveals about what actually works: shared values, emotional safety, gradual trust building, communication skills. None of these develop through rapid swiping. All of them require time, attention, and presence. The cultural moment right now is fascinating because there's growing recognition of these truths. More people are rejecting the swipe-fast culture, not because they're anti-technology, but because they've experienced firsthand how it fails to deliver meaningful connection. They're choosing slow dating not as a nostalgic return to some imagined past, but as a pragmatic strategy for actually finding what they want, relationships that feel good, that develop naturally, that are built on genuine compatibility rather than just initial attraction or algorithmic matching. This doesn't mean slow dating is easy or that it guarantees perfect outcomes. Relationships are complex regardless of how people meet. But slow dating removes many of the obstacles that swipe culture creates: the decision fatigue, the objectification, the fear of missing out, the endless comparison, the shallow initial screening that filters out people who might actually be great matches. It creates space for what researchers consistently identify as the actual predictors of relationship success: communication, values alignment, emotional availability, willingness to work through challenges. The truth about slow dating is that it's not really about speed at all. It's about attention. It's about treating potential partners as humans rather than options. It's about using technology as a tool for facilitating connection rather than as an endless source of novelty and distraction. And it's about recognizing that love, real, lasting, satisfying love, has never been something that develops through rapid scanning and quick judgment. It develops through presence, through vulnerability, through shared experience over time. Slow dating simply creates the conditions for that development to happen. Fast swiping creates conditions that work against it. The choice between them isn't about apps versus meeting in person or technology versus tradition. It's about whether dating gets treated as a human process that requires time and care, or as a consumer activity where people shop for partners like products. And that choice, more than any other factor, determines whether modern technology helps or hinders the search for love.
Thank you for watching. If you want to learn how to better understand avoidance, relationships, and psychological biases, then subscribe to our channel, because you deserve beautiful relationships.